I'm trying to think of like what kind of policies he might introduce to try and address cost of living. And he's going to have to do like a bold kind of reform too. I feel like, I forgot who said it, but someone said they toyed around with the idea possibly with reducing income tax and then raising GST to like 15 or 20%. So it's kind of like trying to shift. People have more money in their pocket and they can choose whether to buy more goods and services. And I'm trying to think if I actually agree with that or not, because my sort of like take on people's spending habits and stuff like that like who I know, they tend to spend a lot of money on crap. When I say crap, I mean like, you know, they don't need the latest iPhone. They don't need to be going out and having dinners every night. They don't need to be, you know, they can just drink instant coffee. You don't need an espresso machine with all this sort of stuff. Like people can choose to reduce their spending in those areas, and then if they have lower income tax, so they have more money in their pocket, they'll have the ability to save more, and they'll have, you know, it'll just work out that way. So people have a little bit more control over where their money is going. So the lower income earners may potentially have more money in their pocket that way. But with increasing GST from like say 10% to like 20%, that could have a pretty big impact on businesses, I'd assume. And like, will they just pass that cost down to the, like, you know, I wonder how that would flow out. But I feel like that is kind of a bit of that is a bold reform. But do we need something like that? Does that, like, it'd be really good if they could do like some serious economic modeling on whether that would be whether the public would like that. I'd probably say you might lose your high business income earners or something like that, but your lower income earners might love that. But I don't know what you guys think about that.
But also to set Australia up in what is very challenging times globally as well. So I've been busy, focused on that. The coalition, or the former coalition, or I'm not sure what they are these days, have been focused on themselves.
Do you have any reflections on it, though? I mean, you've been in the Labor Party at times when it's been in somewhat of disarray, and so you know what it's like to be inside that. Do you have any reflections from the other side?
This is the worst I've seen. I was openly have said that the Labor Party decisions that we made in focusing on internals is one of the things that meant that we only lasted for 2 terms, even though I believe under both Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, we delivered really important reforms in climate change, in gender equity, in the schools program, in so many areas. We saw Australia through the global financial crisis, but because we were focused on internals too much, Australians marked us down, and they'll mark down the Liberals and the National Party. They are doing that. The issue that I think is very much there, though, is I can't see how they get out of this spiral. You have had a very close election of Susan Lee over Angus Taylor just months ago, and an undermining of the first woman to lead the Liberal Party from day one. Angus Taylor has not done his job as Shadow Defence Minister, has barely uttered a word in his portfolio. And what that will do is lead to an ongoing rolling wall, if you like, of dissent and division. And I can't see how they get out of it. The Liberals don't like each other, the Nationals don't like each other, and the Liberals don't like the Nationals. And as a result, One Nation have seen their vote, or their polling at least, increase substantially.
I want to ask you about your visit this week that you obviously hosted the Israeli President Isaac Herzog in Canberra. You've often said that Australians don't want overseas conflicts imported here onto our shores. That wasn't the intention of the Herzog visit, obviously, but it has been a consequence of it, hasn't it?
Oh, certainly. And many people, I think, have failed to look at the context of this visit. And the context of this visit is that 15 Australians had their lives cut short when the terrorist atrocity occurred, driven by anti-Semitism on December 14. So President Herzog is not a member of the Netanyahu government. He is the head of state, the equivalent of Governor-General Sam Mostyn. He came primarily to give comfort to those who are grieving directly. The families, the time that I spent with him was primarily at the Chabad synagogue in Bondi, talking face to face with people like young Matilda's mum and dad, her sister, talking with other people who are grieving as part of what overwhelmingly was members of that very tight-knit community led by Rabbi Ullman. So that was the purpose of the visit. I understand that people feel very strongly about the Middle East, and I understand that people also have a right to express their views about the Middle East and about what has occurred there, whether it be the atrocity that occurred on October 7, the largest anti-Semitic loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, whether it be the extraordinary number of innocent lives that have been lost in Gaza, the actions of the Israeli government that my government has been critical of over humanitarian.
Yeah, that's actually a good point for pensioners. So Luke says, regarding the GST increase we were talking about before, it can hit pensioners as well because it don't make an income. Yeah, so I guess like your pension or like your super, however you're sort of getting your retirement money, I guess, yeah, if GST alone increase, yeah, they don't necessarily get more income when they reduce income tax. Yeah, that is actually a very good point. That's funny how you went to Chapad Synagogue. Yeah, so I think the big spenders, but also most vulnerable. Seems like, yeah, like it's not going to be a pretty way to do it, and that's where I think some good economic modelling, which like Angus Taylor should be able to do, right? He should actually be able to have the skills or like know the right people and be able to execute that modelling and be able to show it in a way that could say, yeah, like it is a good idea or it isn't a good idea. And I think like even if it wasn't a good idea or whatever they come up with, as long as like they just come out and say like, yeah, this isn't a good idea, and then this is, if it shows that they're doing something, I think they'll gain a lot of supporters. Even if they say, hey, we've done this modeling, this is basically what we think, blah, blah, blah. Maybe dropping income tax isn't the best thing, and maybe increasing GST probably isn't the best thing. Or whatever reform they end up trying to, campaign with. As long as they do something, I think that's what the Australian public sort of want, because what it kind of feels like is whatever Labor's doing, it's people like they're saying that it's like doing all this good stuff, but there's still that difference of like people don't feel like they're doing better. Like people don't feel like they're better now than they were, so and so years ago, which I think is like that's the biggest part, and that's why like people are trying to move away from the two-party system and are likely moving over to one nation due to that. It's crazy I went to the Chadbad synagogue. Yeah, like this is the thing with Albanese, right? And because I'm not like a huge Albanese supporter, but to me he does a good job, I think, at being quite neutral. Might be the way that I sort of think. Like he knows he plays like supporting Israel and being very sympathetic to Israel and the Jewish community, but then he also shows a lot of like compassion towards the Palestine and stuff like that. So obviously recognizing that that something needs to happen with the two-state solution over in Israel and Palestine, the Gaza Strip. So. And, we all sort of saw Netanyahu basically start taking swings at, Albanese after his comments on that. And then surprisingly, you see Angus Taylor, he actually supported, like he didn't support Australia in that exchange. He actually it kind of looked more like he was supporting Netanyahu's words on what Albanese was saying, which I don't know about you, but what would you prefer? Would you prefer Australian MPs, especially like an opposition leader, would you rather them stand up for the Australian government when hearing those exchanges from another country, or would you try and side with that country? It's kind of like, imagine if you have like a brother or a sister and they get in an argument, or maybe like a partner, they get in an argument with someone over road rage where your partner or your brother or whatever cuts someone off, and then the other person basically gets out of the car, starts shouting, and you kind of do like a weird, you're in a weird bit of a limbo there where you're like, oh, well, like, do I, do I stick up for my brother, even though I kind of think that he's in the wrong, but, like, he's my brother, he's my family, or like, your partner, like, oh, don't talk to my, missus like that or whatever. Or do you kind of go like, yeah, well, you were in the wrong. So this guy who's shouting at you now in traffic is right. So I'm not going to say anything. Like, what do you do in that situation? I kind of feel like, yeah, is it good that Angus Taylor kind of took like the Israel stance on it and kind of, supported the attack on Albanese and the Australian government, or, should Angus Taylor have actually, been like, yeah, like, the Australian government says that we should recognize, the two-state solution, or yeah, like it's always, I find it a bit weird. It's always like a bit of a weird thought experiment. He only recognised Palestine because Tony Blair okayed it. Yeah, you reckon? I thought. I think Australia's just so. They're very we're a very kind of like, we all want peace and want to avoid war kind of thing. I feel like the two-state solution thing is. Because they didn't actually endorse it or like am I right in that? Like, I thought they just recognized that then that something needs to happen. Does Australia recognize Palestine as Palestinian state? Effective today, Sunday the 21st of September, the Commonwealth of Australia formally recognises the independent and sovereign state of Palestine. Okay, all right, so Australia recognises legitimate and... I mean, at the end of the day, not that really kind of makes a huge difference because, we're just Australia at the end of the day. Yeah, 21st September, because that's pretty recent. Legitimate and long-held aspirations of the Palestinians. Yeah. Like, so at the end of the day, the government's sort of doing this sort of stuff, but then also we're doing quite a lot in terms of, anti-Semitism and for the Jewish community and stuff like that. So it's playing both fields quite a lot, and I guess that's kind of maybe that sort of feeds into the fuels those sort of things like the Bondi stuff and the pro-Palestine marches, and because we kind of sit in this limbo of playing both sides of the fence. But I think Albanese, I think he's just playing very, very neutral, and I think he does it well to a degree. I don't know if you guys disagree with that.
Humanitarian aid and relief being able to be presented there. And certainly people have a right to express that, but they need to comprehend that sometimes the actions don't actually advance a cause, they undermine it. And that is what has occurred, I think, on a number of occasions. I am concerned. I'm concerned that the great deal of hurt which the Muslim community are feeling about the disruption of prayers. I understand that, and I think that is something that needs a full explanation. I know that has caused a great deal of distress. And I think one of the things that we need to do is just have a little bit more empathy and kindness in the way that we deal with issues, even issues that are difficult. You can have a strong position on the Middle East and on justice for Palestinians, and I support a Palestinian state being alongside the Israeli state, and my government.
This is where I think he loses those voters going to One Nation, and that is because have compassion, have be nice towards what's going on and all that sort of stuff, but at the same time it's kind of like, okay, yeah, but what about all the hurt that the Australians are feeling? Why isn't there the same level of compassion towards Australians? And I think that's kind of where the disconnect is with this messaging and with Australian voters.
Government is the first government to recognise Palestine. That doesn't mean that you can't empathise and understand that the Jewish community are really hurting in Australia, not just those directly affected, and to reach...
Like right there, it's like, oh, the Jewish community's hurting, Jewish community's hurting. It's like, yeah, but like, what percentage of Australians are in the Jewish community? Less than 1%. Right, let's just Based on the census, Jewish citizens make up about Australian population. All right, let's even just double that just to round it up, right? So even if it was 1%, say 0.5%, 1%, whatever, just in case they're not, whatever. You've still got like the whole other percentage of Australians that are hurting, that are struggling, and they don't feel heard. And it's like you're putting in a lot of effort to like address these people, which is fair enough, but don't forget about the rest. Like that's, yeah, like I think I've heard more about the Jewish community, the Palestinian community, the Muslim community. I've heard more things about protecting them and supporting them and being compassionate towards them, and et cetera, which like I agree with. Like, you should be compassionate and, towards everyone, especially coming from like any sort of like humanitarian perspective or all that sort of stuff. Like I agree with it. But at the same time, when you've got a lot of people like Australians that are, they're born and raised here, they do the right thing, they pay their taxes, they go to public schools, they try and fit in, they do all the things that you want them to do, and they still end up getting hung out for dry. That's that's happening to your own kind. And I think that's where I feel like the messaging is starting to get lost here. Is always trying to be diplomatic. That's what people say. He has no backbone, but you need a certain amount of diplomacy with straightforwardness. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the backbone is kind of like, okay, well, are you going to like what side are you going to be on? Trouble with this bloke, my government, it's not yours. Albo, the Australian government. Yeah, forget about what's happening here. We're just over them now. This thing that yeah, exactly. I think both you guys, Dave and Luke, are spot on. It's we still got a few more, or it's only it's not even a year yet into this term, but you still got a bit of time to make up for it. But unless they start, I think they do need to start focusing more on Australians, or at least, it's. Even if it's not even just Albanese, even if it's like the Home Affairs Minister, Housing Minister, they're starting to focus more on that. Is we got Mr. Beach. The problem is not taxing the rich. People want to talk about how the 50 and 60-year-olds were great. 50s and 60s were great. Top tax rate was 85%. The inequality is the rich not paying their fair share. Yeah, like I think you could tax the rich more, but I just feel like that's a lot of risk there. But like you saw the uproar with the whole super tax, just increasing those thresholds for the super tax. They did get away with it, I think, but there is different ways to do that. But taxing the rich is one way to go about it. I think with the tax cuts, it's kind of like, is that kind of doing that to an extent? I think Min's being overly zealous. He's compromised by the Australian Americans, so no way to prove it. May have saved the Greens. Yeah, maybe.
Out as Australians in what has been a very difficult time.
Nonetheless, if you're talking about advancing a cause and actions towards advancing a cause, your overall cause is social cohesion and advancing social cohesion. The President's visit hasn't really advanced social cohesion, has it?
Well, the President's visit was about him providing comfort and solidarity with people who are grieving. Now, people can have criticism of the actions of the Netanyahu government, are entitled to express that. The issue, though, of the President and his visit here was about meeting with members of the community who are grieving. And one of the things I said in Parliament the other day is that in terms of the broader issues, there are two paths in the Middle East. One is the path of peace and reconciliation and a settlement which gives Palestinian justice, but also recognises the right of Israel to exist within secure borders, to have security assured, its right to defend itself, or the status quo, which has been there for decades now, of a very strong state of Israel, with people, Palestinians, being an oppressed people, people who don't have any self-determination, people who suffer from poverty, people who are in an extraordinarily difficult position. And you need to have a path that improves that situation, because the biggest victims are, yes, Palestinians suffering, continue to suffer, but Israelis suffer as well, with a failure to have security on a day-to-day basis because of terrorist acts, not just October 7, but others as well. And how do you actually provide a solution? A solution must, by definition, include engagement with both Israelis and Palestinians. That's the only way that any conflict has ever been advanced. And if conflict is allowed to continue, the biggest suffering occurs to the less powerful group, not the more powerful. And that's why if people are serious about advancing the life of Palestinians, they can't simply say the sort of simplistic slogans, from the river to the sea is about one state, from the Jordan River to the sea. Israel isn't about not existing.
That's banned.
Israel will fight for its existence, and that will mean ongoing conflict. And that's why we actually genuinely need a two-state solution, not a one-state solution. And that's something that I advocate publicly. I say the same thing privately.
It is what we said at the very, very start of the video. Remember, I was like, let's hope that he's not talking about immigration so much. Like, I feel like how are they getting away with not talking about immigration at all, and we're still just talking about like Palestine and that sort of stuff, which such a small percentage of the Australian population. We got to start talking about what the Australians are feeling, which is definitely this sort of stuff.
I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Mr. Beach says they want to use our road, our people, our resources, but not pay for the infrastructure they need. Remember, people used to be trained on the job. Now you have to come to the job trained. Yeah, I think people used to be trained on the job. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that depends on what jobs you're talking about. But we do need more skilled labour. There's a skilled labour shortage, which I think that addresses the immigration sort of stuff. But yeah, I think, isn't there like now an incentive where don't small businesses get like a 10 grand grant or something like that to take on apprentices or something like that? TAFE free, obviously. Labour's free, TAFE, and $10,000. Oh yeah, here you go. I swear I didn't just read that then. 10K incentive payment for apprentices in construction are helping to create jobs of the future. Already close to 600 free TAFE places already been delivered. Luke says, more and more Australians go hungry every day, but we have to focus on the suffering on the other side of the world. Yeah, I think that's... Like, I still think the suffering on the other side of the world, it is important, but it's kind of like, it does... Why can't we address both? You know what I mean? Like, you have how many dozens and dozens of people in their party on the bench, and in both parties. Like, how are we not sort of addressing both issues at once? And how have we let our major parties talk more about issues that are going on the other side of the world over what is going on in our own backyard? So, no, you're right. It's not a responsibility to address both, but like, I still think there is a degree of you need some sort of global presence, and Australia does need to show global support. Like, I think that is necessary, but not at the jeopardy of our own, our own economy and our own issues. So, I'm sure if you look online, you probably find that Labor talk more about the Palestine, Israel, Jewish community stuff, more than what they talk about the housing crisis or cost of living crisis. All that sort of stuff is more being done by one nation and those sort of the likes of those sort of people. So I think that's I think Australians are very, very tuned into that at the moment because obviously we feel what we feel. But I think we still need to, pay attention to what's going on in Gaza and Israel and Iran and obviously Ukraine, Russia and all that sort of stuff. We don't compare ourselves to Africa. We compare ourselves to the old Australia. Yeah, that's 100% true. Which we can't do either because we're different to how we were 50 years ago, and we can't go back to that, just by fact of like technology, really. Manufacturing and all that sort of has just changed. Even in 20 years, it's going to be a whole lot different, especially if we successfully roll out net zero and all that sort of stuff. It's going to be a completely different world. Like, can you imagine, like, do you guys remember like 30 years ago, we didn't even have a phone, like a mobile phone? Like, that's so crazy. And so in another, like, 20 years ago, we didn't even, when was the first iPhone? Like, 20 years ago? My first iPhone was, I think, the iPhone 3. When did the iPhone 3 come out? There you go. So, I don't know if you guys saw that movie. This is a bit of a segue. Is it Guardians of the Universe? No, not that one. Oh, what was that? Man, I forgot what the movie's called now. It was like a movie series, and like the little alien thing had like this like little mobile device that basically did all the things. And it was basically like an iPhone, but it came out in like the 70s or 80s or something. But yeah, so 20 years ago, the iPhone 3 wasn't even out. So the fact that 20 years ago we kind of didn't even really have this kind of technology. I mean, iPhone 1, but yeah. So like in another 20 years, imagine what we're going to have in another 20 years. Like everything's just advancing. So like insane to think, that we're just going to have a whole different mountain of problems. So like it's hard to predict. So I think like when we compare ourselves to Australia back in the 50s, 60s, we've basically gone through 2 cycles of this. So it's not even, I don't think it's a good idea to compare ourselves that far back just because it's just a completely different metric system. It's a completely different time. We really should be focused on, maybe I think we need to position ourselves better in the global scale, because I feel like the way that like international trade and how affected we are by oil and all that sort of stuff, it's just you can compare yourself 10 years ago and see a big difference, 100%. And Prophet says definitely won't vote Albo. Yeah, like I mean, at the end of the day, I think you got to look at what's in your electorate too. Don't always just focus on Albo, especially with your state. I don't know where you are in the country, but state elections have a huge impact on how your everyday life too. So definitely suggest that. But yeah, at the moment, I mean, if we were to run like a federal election today, I think I would still probably vote Labor, just based on what there currently is. The country's still running. I don't know how the Liberals would, or the coalition would actually function at the moment. Like it's just what's the douche in a turd sandwich, the South Park episode. I think people kind of feel like that a little bit.
Before we recognised Palestine at the United Nations, I gave him that courtesy and engaged very directly in Australia's view about the need to move forward.
The New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, has backed in the police response, and he's repeatedly emphasised that the protesters were given an alternative site and made their way to an area that was deemed illegal. How much blame do you put at the feet of the demonstrators And also, overall, I know you mentioned one element of the police response there, but should there be a review into how heavy-handed police were?
Look, overwhelmingly, you have to recognise as well there's a difference. I draw a distinction between the leaders of the demonstration, some of whom are part of far-left parties, such as Josh Lees, and overwhelmingly, a whole lot of people would have just gone because they care about these issues and went along to peacefully express their views. But the organisers were engaged with the police. They chose not to come up with or participate in a sensible way that would have ensured separation by having the meeting in Hyde Park and then marching to Belmore Park. It is beyond my comprehension why that would not be taken up, that suggestion by the New South Wales Police. Now, I also, as I've said, I want to see an explanation. I'm very empathetic about the hurt that's being felt by the Muslim community of prayers being disrupted.
Yes, your concern is specifically around that element.
I think that is an issue that needs addressed.
See, like even here, this is where, oh man, like it's got to stop doing this. I understand what he's saying about the Muslim community, the Muslims taking prayer and like having like compassion and whatever towards that. But like all it does, like when Australians hear that stuff, it creates that separate. Well, this is my perspective. Of course, I might be wrong here or whatever. But like, it kind of just says, okay, hang on, but you've got all these people protesting. Like it's just creating that separation, I think. And Australians are looking at that going like, okay, hang on. Why are you saying all this sort of stuff about the Muslim community? Why are you saying all this stuff about the Jewish community, but you're not sort of actually taking hard action for Australians? And I think it's just coming out more and more. The far left only exists when it comes to this matter. Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I think who was I talking to? I think I was making these comments on, I think it was a Two Worlds Collide podcast post or whatever. But they were going on about far left, like the far leftists and far leftists. And I think it was around, extremism and stuff like that. I still don't know who far left extremists are, like in terms of like a movement or like a party, kind of like the NSN, for example, or it does. I don't know. Like, can you guys link me something in terms of like any sort of like extremist leftists that are being violent or anything like that? Because the far left kind of gets dragged as this like they the far left is doing this, far left is, we've got to stop the far left and blah, blah. But I don't know who the hell they're talking about. Like, if you're just talking about, like, pro-Palestinians, it's like, I don't know if that's, like, far left, because it's kind of like the Palestinians, like, it's no different to, like, people protesting for, the Ukraine stuff and stuff like that as well. Like, I don't quite understand where that's coming from when you're talking about far leftists, where as, like, far right extremists is kind of a bit more evident with, NSN and Nazi groups and stuff like that. New law has been put forward in WA due to the bombing attempt on the Invasion Day marches. Yeah. And so they should, like, we've got to crack down on that stuff. I mean, I kind of always say this when people are going on about like, the whole free speech stuff and stuff like that, like, you're going to get into this world where it's like, okay, you can either let people have these really, really extreme views online where they can foster this type of hate and they can basically get people on board. You can, not manipulate, but you can kind of like get people revved up online about a particular thing. You can either like let that happen online or in crowds and protests or in public places, or you can go, okay, we're going to prohibit this type of speech. But then it's like, okay, well then you're touching on the free speech sort of thing. And then you kind of, the consequence of that is you're going to get the people who are pro free speech. You're going to get a lot of backlash in that. So it's kind of like, yeah, but you kind of don't want people to have like these really extreme views to be able to enact any sort of types of violence, or at least fuel people to feel that way, if that makes sense. You should watch Adam Curtis. Can you get out of my head? Has an answer for you. Okay, let's Adam Curtis YouTube. just Adam Curtis. Is this the guy? Is this the one? Can't get you out of my head. Is this the one? Am I blind? Am I retarded? Can't get you out of my head. Oh, it's Death Note. Hell yeah. Okay. Let's save that to watch later. Hour 15. Alright, that looks pretty trippy actually. Alright, I'll put that in save later. Just put it into YouTube. Yeah, I know. Not voting Labour or Liberal. Oh, well then you gotta go independent then, I reckon. Or if you're up for the Greens or Family First, or I'm sure there's going to be a new party possibly that's going to. I think it was at Malcolm Turnbull was saying there's a bit of a gap there for a centre right party to
Angus Taylor takes over
to potentially fill the gap. You a fringe experiment when you hate a side of politics. You're a centrist when you hate both sides. I could not agree with you more. It's, I mean, like, I'll happily put my arm up and say I'm going to be a bit more on the Labour side at the moment, but that's only because the right is so weak at the moment, and I'm not going to, like, One Nation is just too far out there, and like, I think they're kind of their place is to basically make that centre right seem a little bit more sane, I think. But when there's nothing there, then the only right sort of party you can go to is One Nation, which I don't think is a good thing. And I don't think Labor should have such a huge majority in the lower house. I think that's also a little bit dangerous, because then they only need like a couple of Green votes, and then boom, they've got new laws. And I think it needs a good balance. So by part 3, you should know exactly what the modern far left is. All right. Is it an Australian thing? That's as well. So I feel like, depending on where it's made, it's a different type of left.
Because I think people need to have a right to practice their faith in peace. And, some of the footage, of course...
Yeah, I agree. I think Labor are a little bit more centre than any other party. I agree with that.
You need to be careful about footage because you don't get to see the full picture. But what I have seen is the truth is that there has been a lot of disruption. There has been...
caused by the demonstrators?
Over a period of time. There are elements who've been involved in the campaign, including some of the action that's taken place very directly in my office, where people have been stopped from getting assistance for Medicare, Social Security, everything else. It's not a policy office. It's there to help constituents in the inner west of Sydney, and people have found that it's acceptable to put stink bombs into the office, to destroy some of the office, break windows, graffiti, abuse people, accuse people trying to go to Mass because it was in the grounds of the Anglican Church and it's part of their premises, and some of the behaviour does nothing whatsoever to advance the Palestinian cause or anything else.
PM, you've sort of been on both sides of it, haven't you? Because you obviously copped a lot of criticism for your handling of the Bondi massacre and of anti-Semitism in general, and that was, really the narrative of the summer, which I'm sure was very personally difficult for you, among other things. And on the other side, as you say, in your hometown, in your electorate of in Marrickville, you've had huge sort of vociferous protests from the pro-Palestinian movement or elements thereof. Now that the worst of that sort of backlash from the summer is over, how do you reflect on that period, and what have you learned from that period?
That you have to keep to a principled path. That part of what has occurred is because we haven't, as I said in Parliament the other day, viewed this as like a football team game where you're cheering on every tackle that South Sydney make and hoping that the other side drop the ball totally the whole way through. There needs to be nuance in this debate, and there's too much anger. And one of the things that is very clear to me is that overwhelmingly Australians don't want the conflict in the Middle East to continue. They want innocent people to be protected, whether they be Israelis or Palestinians. But they also don't want people to bring conflict here of any sort. So we have taken a principled position. You're right, that's meant criticism that is completely contradictory. And that to me, you have to, when you're in a position of responsibility, you have to deal with that. But one of the things that I would say is that after other...
All that's missing from that statement, or like that perspective, for me, what would make me feel just a little bit better is just prioritizing how Australians feel. I think that's all that's sort of missing, because he kind of does like
protected, whether they be Israelis or Palestinians, but they also don't.
It's like people want to be protected.
It's because we haven't, as I said in Parliament the other day, viewed this as like a football team game where you're cheering on every tackle that South Sydney make and hoping that the other side drop the ball totally the whole way through. There needs to be nuance in this debate, and there's too much anger. And one of the things that is very clear to me is that overwhelmingly Australians don't want the conflict in the Middle East to continue. They want innocent people to be protected, whether they be Israelis or Palestinians.
See there, like when he's talking about like people don't want conflicts brought over here, but like address why we don't want that. The reason why we don't want that is because it's impacting like our safety. We don't feel safe is, a big part of it. We don't feel like we're being protected. We feel like their wars coming over here is endangering our everyday life. Like it's kind of like if there was just some sort of like recognition of that and just saying like, hey, like we understand, like, we had like a safe space and like people used to be able to go out and do this, and now Australians feel like there are wars that are being brought over, across our borders. Like even if you just says something like that, I think that would resonate with a lot of Australians, because that's what like Pauline Hanson is saying. That's what other sort of other leaders are sort of saying. Like it's just...
But they also don't want people to bring conflict here of any sort. So
you can say like, don't want conflict brought here. We want protectionism for the Jewish and Palestinian or Muslim community. Yeah. But it's just missing that kind of like the foundation, which is we don't want, like, we feeling like our lives are also being impacted heavily by these kind of like this violence that has been brought over in our borders. Because within Australia, we wouldn't have any sort of like Jewish or Muslim issues or anything like that. Just if you're just talking about Australians as own, just because we're not sort of like that way inclined in terms of religion and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's just sort of where the little bit of a fundamental disconnect is. So what messages we got here? We've got Prophet saying scrap net zero. I'm a bit of a pro climate change sort of person, so I think we do maybe not. We need a heavy reduction in I think as Australia we need to show that we're doing something about carbon emissions, exorbitant waste of taxpayer. Yeah, like I think that's kind of a given. The taxpayer funds. I mean, everyone wants like some sort of, not a Doge, but over 9%. I'm not too sure where that's coming from. Yeah, my everything from I understand with net zero is Australia is a huge contributor in terms of emissions per GDP, not GDP, per capita. That how much we take of the allowable emissions until 2050 or wherever it is. We do take up a decent portion of that in comparison to what our population is, and that includes exports and stuff like that. So Australia does have a piece of they do have to we do have to do something, and if we do go towards a net zero the way that we are going to be quite ahead of the curve in terms of innovation if we can pull it off. I think it's a good opportunity. There's left and right, but there's also up and down. Do they work for the people on the up, on the way down? Can you argue what's better, neoliberals or neoconservative? but they're both, yeah. Australia adopting net zero wouldn't affect anything. We're too small. I disagree with that. I think adopting net zero, like I'm not going to say like we need to be zero net emissions by 2050, or the world's going to blow up. Like, I'm not saying from that perspective, but I think having a commitment and then working like on a global scale towards that target, I think it says something for Australia on a global scale. The fact that we do live in a position where we have a position where we can actually do it as well, I think is good. We contribute to roughly 1%. No, that 1%, it's not accurate. You can, because we export, because you got to be responsible for how much you're exporting as well. I think when you start to look at how am I going to do this? How am I going to type this out? What percentage of emissions does Australia contribute when you include exports on a per capita basis? I'm going to have to try and find. The clients for roughly 4.5% of blah blah blah, which with 8% coming from without fuel exports, the country would be 1%. So that's with and then when you look at a per, what's the report on this? Yeah, it's this one here. So this is the climate analytics. So this was August last year. So when you're looking at emissions, you got to look at per capita. Has one of the highest per capita emissions. Australia has one of the highest per capita emissions for greenhouse gases. Double to China, 9 times bigger than India. In terms of fossil fuel emissions in 2022, it was the 8th largest per capita. This is purely on a domestic basis without factoring. Because when we, I'm not going to go too much into this, but I've got to get back into my net zero stuff again at some point. But you got to relate it back to the budget, the carbon budget, which is, I mean, if all right, hang on, let's caveat with this first. If you just don't believe in climate change, then anything to do with net zero is just like, you don't believe in climate change. So whatever, like, do as many emissions as you want, right? But this is for the people that kind of think that there is some sort of climate crisis occurring, but just believe that Australia's contribution to it is so insignificant. Why are we basically hurting ourselves to try and make the change when you've got all these other countries that are, who are bigger contributors? Okay, I understand that argument, and I think that is where the real debate is. If anyone's sort of like debating that like climate change just isn't a thing, then it's just, there's no point. There is no debate, because you're not going to be able to convince someone that it is, right? But if you kind of say like, does Australia have a bigger contribution to climate to climate action? I think it's a much it's a debate that's more worth having. But in terms of, so what the carbon budget is so in accordance with what like climate science is saying, is that we have, if we warm the earth by 1.5 degrees by whatever year it was, wasn't it like 2035 or something, whatever, then that's kind of where we hit this point of no return. And so for the world to basically increase its core temperature by 1.5 degrees, we have a certain carbon budget that we're allowed to use until then. And so a certain amount of gigatons of, with limiting globe. Yeah, so we only have 200 gigatons of CO2 that we can emit until we hit this point where we're going to be at 1.5 degrees. And so what they do is they basically say, okay, well, what's Australia's projected fossil fuel exports going to be from 2024 to 2035, And then it's saying that if Australia continues the way that it is, we would consume up to 7.5% of that budget, and around 9.1% considering their total. So that's 9.1% including what we do our own. So 7.5 is just for like exports and stuff like that, and then 9.1 is including what we do as well. So with no sign of government projected fossil fuels exports are starting to drop, blah blah blah. So when you look at like that 1%, it's a small snapshot of what the actual complete picture is, because you got to include exports, and you also got to take into account of what the actual carbon budget is. So there's a lot more to it than just going, oh well, you know, how much do we emit divided by, you know, what other countries are doing and blah blah blah. Like there's heaps more to it. There's a lot of climate analytics to look into. I've dug into this a fair bit. So, and this is all sort of supported by, you know, international energy agencies and yada yada yada. I'll be jumping back into net zero stuff later on. I just went heaps into it last year, and yeah, it just nothing was really happening around it, so it all sort of merged into other stuff. So sorry, I've missed a few things. In my view, net zero acts more of a symbolic goal and a target rather than a plan that you have to achieve. Net zero acts more as a symbolic goal. I mean, there is a lot of business innovation, startups. There's a lot of room for technological breakthroughs around greener energy, which, you know, the government is investing in. So there's a lot of that too. Like one of my mates is at uni. He's a lecturer. He's he's in the green hydrogen sort of green fuel sort of. He's doing lots of research and PhDs and stuff like that on that. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in terms of green energy, which, man, if there's like a green fuel that comes out that can just like 1-for-1 replace fuel, that will be the best thing. That would be that would completely just transform the market, because a major problem with our emissions is the transport sector, which is like 25% I think of our emissions. So if you can just make like big tractors and stuff like that, if you could make like tractors and trucks and bus, big equipment use a green fuel, mate, that would just be revolutionary. And that's what I think that we sort of need that to happen, because you can't have an EV freaking bulldozer or, you know, massive, you know, 1,000,000-ton truck. You know, that's just EVs just aren't going to get that sort of just don't have that sort of power. It's we need something serious for that. Anyways, I might even drop you guys a link if you're curious about this stuff, but I would say Australia's just chuck that into your stuff, but if you're interested in that, but go through that. That will give you a better understanding on Australia's contribution to global emissions than just your standard sort of like this sort of crap. So, yeah.
We have taken a principled position. You're right, that's meant criticism that is completely contradictory. And that, to me, you have to, when you're in a position of responsibility, you have to deal with that. But one of the things that I would say is that after other national tragedies have occurred, whether it be the Link Cafe...
Sorry, just the last bit on this. Like, I think there is a better debate around the net zero rollout. The trickiest bit is the transition, which you're 100% right, Lockie. Like, it's the transition, rewiring the nation. It's actually implementing those sort of things, which are like the real. I feel like is a better. You're going to make more gains in terms of a debate on that sort of stuff, rather than like, you know, just is climate change a real thing, or Australia's contribution to climate change. Like, I don't think that is a productive debate. I think it's more like, how can we do it working like federally and at state level and like with the landowners of like, like farmers and stuff like that. I think that the central part of the debate needs to be a bit more around that sort of stuff. And that's why, like, with the net zero stuff, it hurts to go through it all, because I feel like you're still arguing with people on whether climate change is real. And it's like, man, if that's where the debate is, we're never gonna get this done. More focus needs to be on like, how is it actually, being implemented? And because that's where the cost blowouts are. That's where things are just going to get really, really disorientated. That's where there's not going to be a lot of cohesion around it, and it's not going to be successful, because it's going to be so, there's a lot of people going to be butting heads around it. And if you're still having a debate that it's climate change real, I think that's we're not going to achieve it one way or another.
Siege, Port Arthur, the Bali bombing, there hasn't been a politicisation of it. Here there was an attempt to secure political advantage, perceived within 24 hours. And that, to me, is entirely inappropriate. I can't conceive, as a political leader, of seeing an event such as that and going, OK, what are the politics of this? It's a time for national unity and for the country to come together. And people chose very consciously, some people chose. And I draw a big distinction between the engagement of some political figures and the response of the local community. I was sitting in the lounge rooms of members of the Chabad community in Bondi, the synagogue, engaging with Rabbi Ullman, engaging with many members of the community very directly, visiting people in hospital, engaging, having people in my office at Kirribilli House, having meetings, having that engagement. And they were warm, generous and kind. They weren't looking at pointing figures. What they were looking at was a community that was grieving, and that response stood in stark contrast to some of the media coverage, which wouldn't have perceived that at all. And I made a conscious decision to not take TV cameras with me wherever I went, to look for this as an opportunity. I saw this as a responsibility. Firstly, what did we need to do to keep Australians safe? That was the immediate issue that we had to do, not to engage in the sort of politics that we saw. And we did that. And I think that the engagement, some of the political rhetoric that was ramped up came back on the people who used it. And that's why we saw, for example, after all of the rhetoric that occurred, the National Party didn't vote for a single change did they support. Not gun laws, not racial vilification, not hate speech laws. And the Liberal Party had issues quite clearly that we've seen with that as well. We're just engaged from a principled point of view of what do we need to do to keep people safe, and how do we advance that in the future as well.
You've characterised the Bondi backlash, Prime Minister, as driven in large part by...
So it's really interesting when he says that, because whenever I've debated people on those laws that came out, I think my sort of stance on those laws that when they came out was it has to start somewhere. And I think with the laws that they brought out, there's a clause in there that states that they're going to revisit how the laws are performing after, like, I think it's like a couple of years or whatever. But the principal foundation of those laws is to basically take action towards, hate speech and stuff like that, which, like, the reaction to it was, okay, yeah, now the government's trying to silence everyone and they're trying to, like, control us and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh man, I was just so reluctant to think that way, just because everything that you sort of watch of how it was all presented and everything that was going on, to me, the clear intent was that they're trying to make an impact on hate speech. Were they trying to, like, did they rush the laws? Yeah, but like there was a lot of pressure to act. Was it done perfectly? Probably not, but there's room, like once it's out, there is wiggle room to be able to actually change them post production. But yeah, like it's just funny, like when you hear Anthony Albanese sort of come out and speak about it like this, and it sounds all genuine, but then everyone's reaction to it is just completely the opposite.
By political actors. But looking back, do you acknowledge that you were on the wrong side for a fair chunk of time on the question of a Royal Commission, and the Royal Commission advocacy was much wider than just being made by political actors? Do you regret some of the arguments you made?
So even there, like with the guys like, oh, you're wrong on the Royal Commission. So I don't think he was wrong on the Royal Commission. I think the Royal Commission was a bit. I still think there needs to have been more investigation. Things needs to be rolled out a bit more, especially like the coroner inquest, the federal review. I think after them, that's when you sort of do your Royal Commission, because you don't know anything about what's going on until after that. Labour was focused on Anderson, and LNP was on the Muslims. Yeah, and like Labour came out and literally, you could tell that they were after NSN. They literally Minns came out and said NSN like specifically, because there's evidence of NSN like figures and far right extremists basically having a perspective on what was happening. And when you look at like what happened in New Zealand, it's all there. And this is where I was talking about like that far left extremists versus the far right extremists. Like it's all the sort of signs were there, and like it was quite clear to me anyway that that's what they're trying to do, because the next time that something's going to happen, it's probably going to happen sooner or later, which is why they wanted to act quicker. And then straight after, like, they did catch those people that were driving up to like Sydney from Victoria, and they also, the people in Perth, what they were posting online. Like, it's just, there's lots of that sort of stuff going on. It's like, well, fuck it. Like, of course they're going to like, want to create laws around that. But people are more focused on like impacting on free speech and stuff like that, which, like you're allowed to worry about it. But I just feel like it was a bit, that there was like 70% or 80% of it, a majority was just trying to, focus in on what was going on. In practice so far, I believe the laws have dismantled a Nazi group, and yep, 100%. And I find it hard to think that these laws have been as bad as, yes, okay, Lockie, thank you. Because this is what I said to Scott Challen. Is like the problem that I have with a lot of this sort of stuff, that like if you watch my whatever, you'll see that like what my like sort of tick on it is, you'll have people going like, they're going to, because this is what I saw coming out of COVID as well, is like they're going to control us. Government is going to try and like stop us from like being able to speak about political parties. They're going to like lock me up for talking about immigration. They're going to, they're giving us the vaccine so they can control us. There's like all these sort of like, even there's under 16 social media ban. It's like, they're trying to control our kids and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, they can go out and say all of this sort of stuff with zero consequences in the future when none of it happens. So like all this sort of stuff that's talking about these Bondi, like post-Bondi laws, it's like, if nothing happens from it, because I said to Scotty I said, look, like in a year's time, if nothing's happened, like, are you going to take back anything you said about these laws, locking up all these people that don't deserve it and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's like if nothing happens from it, then what happens? It'll just be a new thing that's going to be the talking point. And that's what I don't like. It's kind of like, you're allowed to say or spin whatever conspiracy theory that you like, work up all these people online to think that the government is out there trying to control you and do all these bad things. You're allowed to do all of that with zero repercussions, and it's fine. And it's like, well, I kind of feel like, well, if you're going to spit that out, show some evidence, show some historic, sort of like, this is what's happened here, or this is what happened there, and show that it's a like for like why, in what scenario is someone sitting like rotting in a jail cell right now going, oh man, like, oh, what did you do wrong? Oh man, I posted this tweet saying, that we should reduce immigration in Australia, and now I'm locked up. Like, that's just not going to happen. But like, oh yeah, but now it could under these new laws. It's like, no. But like Lockie said here, like the NSN's disassembled, the what's that group called, Bitsatir or something, Muslim group. Man, I butcher these names, so I'm so bad at this. Tahrir, disassemble. Is that it? All right, you guys know what I'm talking about. They've disassembled. There's probably like more that have like have been disassembled, or like, you know, they're changing the way that they operate based on the laws, which is exactly what they're doing. And like those thresholds are lower. So if people are trying to do this sort of stuff, they will get, you know, you would hope that it found out Joel Davis has been in solitary confinement for 3 months over a Telegram post. Yeah, but Joel Davis has done. He's contributed to a lot more than just a Telegram post, that's for sure. The laws happen after a shooting, but they won't affect another shooting. It annoys more how vague they are. They can make anti-Semitic laws overnight, but they can't pass. Okay, like you're touching on an important issue there, Luke. Like I would say, but they won't affect another shooting. Well, they that's the thing. Like they did affect another shooting because, like you could just say like straight out it'll affect another shooting because the guns alone, like the new gun laws, is prohibiting people from having those similar types of guns. So like that's already going to affect the shooting in that way. Could people have 4 different firearms? Yeah, but they're not going to have the same caliber of firearms. Isn't the laws now as well, like you have to be an Australian, like a born Australian citizen or something like that to have guns or something like that? So like already that's going to have an impact there. So like it will 100% will have an effect on another shooting, unless they have the guns illegally. But then again, you would think that with the new thresholds, that the people who are selling those guns are likely going to hit a threshold on an ASIO list now, I would assume. Joel Davis
made against it in that period, and do you wish you'd just move more quickly?
No, to be clear, a Royal Commission was announced by New South Wales. We said we would fully participate in that, so that was done. The immediate thing that we needed to do was to assess in that week and days and early period after December 14, were these people part of a cell? Was there going to be another attack in Sydney or somewhere else, which is a pattern that we have seen from terrorist acts overseas? What was the connections between the ACRAMs and international organisations? We knew they were inspired by ISIS, but were there any international actors here involved as well?
What's the answer to that?
What did we need? Well, there'll be a Royal Commission, but it would appear from...
Oh, is this the one where... National Thomas Sewell told a neo-Nazi chat that Joel Davis, who spoke to really outside of this one. In a Telegram message, Mr. Davis invited members to... that's right, rhetorically rape federal independent. Yeah, a legal spender. That's right. Was not easily intimidated, but was shocked by the comments and referred to the threats to the AFP. That's the AFP in this national unified legend. But like from that message, wasn't there actual people that took that seriously though? Wasn't that the issue? That it did influence people to like let's rate threat was actually its rehabilitation charge. Then wasn't he charged from like a state law? Oh no, it's AFP. So let me find it.
The initial assessments, and we had to find out where had they gone. They'd hired the place at Lakemba. Where were they trained? They trained down at the farm on the south coast. Why were they on the Philippines? What was the connection there? So we engaged with all of our intelligence agencies, and the assessment, as the Director General of ASIO said to Senate estimates, is that all of the initial assessment up to this point is that they acted alone as a father and son team. And that is part of the issue, is it's very difficult to detect because there's not electronic activity between them. So it was that. Within the week, we had announced that we would have Dennis Richardson, the most senior person to look at intelligence security issues. We also said we wouldn't wait to have an inquiry that would report in a year's time. We would bring Parliament back and legislate when that was required, both over guns, where I convened a National Cabinet meeting the next day on the Monday afternoon, and we would look at hate speech laws as well, because we identified that as an issue. So we, bear in mind as well, this was over Christmas and New Year period. The National Security Committee met each and every day. We also, in between this period, you couldn't announce. Can you imagine? Just go back a little bit about some of the rhetoric and the engagement of some of the political actors. Had we said we're going to have a Royal Commission, but we won't tell you who the Royal Commissioner will be, we won't tell you what the terms of reference will be, that would have been, in my view, disruptive and would have ensured when...
This is what I was talking about. So the evidence presented in court. So where's this from? Yeah. So the evidence presented in court said that people basically acted on what Joel Davis's messages were to rhetorically rape. Right. So they took it as literally. While Davis's legal team argued that it was a philosophical term of art, authorities alleged the message encouraged a wide audience to engage in violence. Like, this is this sort of shit where it's like, well, fuck around and find out. Like, at the end of the day, like, if you're acting in that sort of behavior, and then like there has to be some degree of accountability when it comes to these kind of things, because it's not like a funny ha joke. This is a known far right extremist group saying these kind of things that engage in violence and this sort of behavior. Like, so that's the sort of people that follow those sort of groups. This is risky behavior, and due to those messages that he sent, you know, people did begin to, you know, act and treat the MP in a certain way, which, you know, abusive and hateful messages towards her. So, like, he did sort of incite that behavior towards that person. So, you know, that's using a carriage service to menace, harass, or offend. Like, it's enabling that sort of, like, so it's an instigation kind of thing. You know, you could look at heavy words against. It's you could say like hurty words on an MP, but at the end of the day, like, do you think it just should have no consequences at all? Like, do you think that you should be allowed to say this kind of thing and then people show up at someone's, you know, begin to basically harass and, you know, talk down to certain people based on, like, I don't know, like, I this is maybe where we differ, but like, I don't think that sort of behavior, I don't think that behavior should be taken lightly, or it should be okay. You can call it a fragile society, but when like these sort of behaviors snowball into further things happening, it's like a gateway. And they're the sort of things that you should try and control in a society, because imagine if like people just willy-nilly did this on like any sort of platform towards any sort of person. That's how things get out of control. And so were these yeah, so the Criminal Code of Act, yeah. I mean, didn't all this sort of stuff happen before the Bondi laws anyway? So there's no real...
You look at the attacks that were made.
Yeah, so I guess that's where maybe some people differ in terms of... This is where I think what we were saying like earlier on, like in terms of the free speech, I think you can either enable these kind of like behaviors, and, you know, when things escalate to what happened at Bondi, or like maybe just some other things, like if you allow these kind of things to creep, eventually something extreme kind of happens, and it's like, oh, how do we stop this? And it's like, well, you can either try and band-aid fix it, or you can start trying to do something to like attack the core of, or like the roots of the actual problem. And that's where I think this is the root of the problem, which is, or is a root, maybe there's multiple roots of it, but I think a root of the problem is allowing people to basically incite or fuel this kind of like behavior and think it's acceptable or it's okay, like, and that the protectionism of this kind of behavior is, oh, we should be allowed to say whatever you want online when it has consequences. I want to see any real arguments on what should be done instead of, 100%. The laws are there as like a safeguard. At the end of the day, like people, we should, right? Let's use an analogy like road rules, right? It would be nice to be able to have 0 speed limits, 0 lanes, and have 0 fines for speeding and blah, blah, blah. It'd be nice if like you could get millions of people in a city or some big area and everyone can drive and basically do whatever they want. They can go as fast as they want. They can park wherever they want. They can do anything they want and no one gets injured. But the reality is that that's just not possible, because when you speed, you increase the risk of a collision. When there's no lanes, there's the risk of collisions, obviously. So the state government or transport puts in all of these laws and to basically manage and de-risk those events from happening. And then if you break those rules, then you get a fine. So it's a deterrent. So it costs money to basically break those rules. So it's a deterrent in order for you to basically work within those rules, right? And you just keep slapping on new things and new things and new things to just try and improve safety and make sure that people like work within a framework that in a high that you would think in a majority of cases it would be successful, that you would have some sort of like degree of safety. It should be a very, very safe environment. It's that's what the laws are there to do, is to basically promote safety in that community. The laws are there to protect, manage decline. So like when we look at free speech or speech online and stuff like that, I believe it's the same. I believe the same concept applies. Like, yeah, it'd be nice if everyone could just say whatever they want and do what they want. But the problem is that people say things and they coordinate violent acts and they coordinate like violent and hateful sort of, spaces, and that needs to be regulated. So that way people feel safe. People don't have to like basically walk around and basically fearing for their safety. I just think that when we talk, like, it's gotten to this stage, it'd be nice if we didn't have to have it. And, instead of having these laws, maybe it'd just be nice if people just freaking didn't behave in this way. But the reality is that if you have a road with no speed limit, people are going to go as fast as they want. And that just increases the risk of a safety event happening. So, yeah, I think to Lockie's point, what could be done instead of the laws like that? It's a good question. Like what like if you're going to say no to the laws or think that they're BS, then what's your alternative? Otherwise, you're just going to have this sort of stuff happening left, right, and center.
Personal attacks by people who should know better against a former High Court Justice in Virginia Bell, then the undermining of the Royal Commission would have occurred had we not been in a position to have a comprehensive announcement.
That argument, though, indicates that you were thinking about it and prepared to move on it as you were arguing publicly against it. But anyway, let's be
very clear.
So this is this is the bit I could not stress to anyone enough. Albanese never said there was going to be no Royal Commission. Okay, and I feel like he's going to say that right here too, because he actually didn't say there won't be a Royal Commission. He said we're going to follow the processes, which is the Coroner Inquest and the Federal Review, and they're going to do things in a particular order, which is the way that they should be done. I don't know why people just didn't quite understand that. Like
that the New South Wales Premier announced a Royal Commission. We said we would fully cooperate with it and have all of the federal agencies. That would have effectively been a New South Wales and Commonwealth Royal Commission. What was occurring at that time was people weren't looking for agreement or consensus or moving things forward. With every single announcement, people were looking for distinction and difference. And I understand at that time as well.
People were looking for a blame. That's the issue, is that people wanted to blame someone. People wanted answers. The amount of people that were posting things on X being like, oh, this is Albanese's fault. And it's just like, Jesus, like that's a stretch. Like, you don't even know what's even happened yet. How can you say it's Albanese's fault when it was like they passed an ASIO threshold and stuff like that. Like it was just interesting.
That grieving families who I was meeting with and having some really tough conversations. I accept that part of my job as Prime Minister is to be a bit of a shock absorber for the nation, for people who were grieving at that time. And I have so much sympathy for them. My disagreement is with some of the political actors.
I'll just quickly move on to one more Herzog question, then we'll move on to some policy stuff. As you've noted, Isaac Herzog's not a domestic ally of the Prime Minister. I wonder if in your conversations with him this week, perhaps at the Kirribilli, without divulging too much detail, what did you learn about the domestic situation in Israel, the settlements issue, the prospect of two states, Benjamin Netanyahu's political future? Did you learn much?
Well, we have private conversations, and my private conversations stay private, whether they're with
high level,
whether they're with the President of Israel or the President of the United States or with President Xi. I engage. That's one of the ways that Australia is able to engage internationally with respect, and that is something that I do in a respectful way. And I was very pleased to. I know President Herzog, if it's not the first meal that we've had together, and he's a former leader of the Israeli Labour Party. He is someone who has a broad experience politically. We first met, I think, probably more than 2 decades ago.
Did this heal relations with Australia, as he said he'd aimed to do?
Well, it, I believe, is a positive thing that was able to occur. You always have to look at the counterfactual. For those people who say that President Herzog should not have been allowed to come to Australia, can you imagine the message that would send to the world, frankly, that we denied the head of state of Israel the opportunity, upon invitation, particularly from the families at Bondi, to come and grieve with them. That, to my mind, people need to always look at the consequences and the counterfactual of where it sits. Now, President Herzog overwhelmingly engaged in, I think, an appropriate and respectful way. That doesn't mean, like any other leader or person, doesn't mean that, I endorse all views or anything else. That's not what it was about. Overwhelmingly, President Herzog, and I might say Mrs. Herzog as well, comforting particularly the women who were grieving there, was something that was very moving.
Last year, PM was a year of delivery for you between May and the end of the year, ticking off election promises. What's this year about on policy and direction for this government and your own?
Well, continuing to deliver and consolidate, continuing to make sure that we deliver on cost of living, because we know people continue to be under financial pressure, setting up Australia for the future. So one of the things that we did in the lead up to the election was to commit to measures that built on what we had done earlier in the term. Most of those now have been implemented, but they're being rolled out. So making sure that we deliver on the commitments, the opening of the urgent care clinics, the free TAFE, the other measures that we have, and frankly, a range of them are exceeding expectations. The batteries program, the tripling of the bulk billing incentive, the number of people now, 2.5 million people have been through urgent care clinics, 725,000 on free TAFE, those measures. But getting the economy strengthened as well. How do we set up future growth? The productivity challenge is ongoing. It's not easy. Areas like critical minerals as well, the deal that we have with the United States, but the arrangements we have with other countries as well. The Prime Minister of Canada will be here in just a few weeks' time. There's a lot that we can do with Canada. Our relations in the region as well. In the past 3 weeks, we've had an agreement and upgrade in the relationship with Timor-Leste, an important treaty with Indonesia. This is a very significant agreement going forward with a very important neighbour. And so setting us up in what are turbulent times, how do we continue to improve and consolidate relations with Pacific Island Forum, with ASEAN nations, as well as with our traditional allies in the United States, the United Kingdom, as well as our European partners.
Prime Minister, do you think the capital gains tax discount is fair?
Look, we think that the capital gains tax discount was something that was brought in by the Howard government. It is something that was an assessment made at that time. We've said we'll consider a range of issues in the lead up to the budget in May, and we'll do our usual deliberative way and orderly way that we conduct ourselves.
I'm obviously trying to get a sharper answer out of you, and you're jousting me away.
I'm glad you noticed.
Yeah. Is intergenerational equity a lens that you're going to be applying to the upcoming federal budget in May? Can I ask that question?
It's a lens that we put across everything. It's why we had the 20% reduction in student debt that the coalition says waste, because we know that it's harder for younger people.
Yeah, see, this is where he loses people, I swear to God. Because you talk about student debt, but like, okay, let's try and find out what percentage of, I don't know, let's just say 25, 25 to 45 25-year-old Australians have student debt. I mean, wait, what if we do that into Where's he getting that stat from? Financial Review and Australian Institute. About 45% admits having personal debt with an average of Jesus. %, report personal debt averaging. Okay. So when they keep talking about this like student debt, like I was going to say something like around like 10 to 20%. I think that would affect like 10 to 20% of like that student debt thing. Like I just don't think that your low income earners, like a majority of people, are hurting because of student debt. That's the like it is a big cohort, I guess, but like I feel like when people are talking about cost of living and trying to get into the housing market and all that sort of stuff, I think it's kind of like, well, I just don't think a majority of people are in that sort of group where they just talk about student debt, slashing it by 20% or whatever. Like that doesn't hit a mass. Like it doesn't hit a majority of Australians, and I think that's why it falls short too.
But have a crack. That's why we've done free TAFE. It's why we're doing the university hubs as well. It's why we will...
free TAFE. I think is a really good thing. Like I think that kind of helps people get into like apprenticeships. It does sort of help with some engineering, some specialists, and I think like for nurses and stuff like that, you still need a degree, so it doesn't really help there. But some skilled jobs, it does help. But again, like it's a good thing, but it's not. It's a small fix for a large problem.
Look at the impact as well of the tax system. It's why we have targeted, if you look at the tax cuts that we're putting in place this year and next year, that lower rate will particularly assist young people because that first marginal tax rate impacts a whole lot of people who are working part-time or who are just entering the workforce. Yeah. It's why we've concentrated on that. And we made the very difficult, and some might say at the time courageous, decision to change stage 3 of the tax cuts.
Sure, and if you wanted to continue that theme of helping young people in particular, and in particular around housing, then you're going to have to look at tax arrangements around housing.
The big issue, of course, in housing is supply. So how do you look at increasing supply? There's a range of measures that we're doing. The 5% deposits has helped tens of thousands already.
Yeah, again, but that doesn't help supply. Like the 5% deposit thing, I don't know if that was a good idea or not. Yeah.
Have had their first home approved as a result of that. We are looking as well at how we reserve new home builds for first home buyers. We announced the first deal in South Australia, 17,000 new homes, 7,000 reserved for first home buyers in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, and we'll be rolling out more of these measures right across the country.
You've definitely not ruling out capital gains tax. You have ruled out negative gearing changes. What about trusts?
Oh, look, we're not getting in the rule in, rule out game as much as you try. Talk to me on the budget is the second Tuesday in May. You can have us on after that, and then I'll talk about the budget.
What are your thoughts on tightening up trusts?
Our thoughts are that what we do is we put together a budget, and obviously our focus at the beginning of this year has been on the national security measures. So we will have a proper budget process. That's what we do. We're an orderly government. The other side are a rabble.
I'll take that as not closing the door on trust. Just one more on the budget process.
But you can ask all of those things, and it becomes a game.
But you do rule out negative gearing. There's a difference in language.
It all becomes a game.
It's a game we have to play, unfortunately.
Well, we're not interested in playing a game. We're trying to get answers out of you. Get some idea.
What you'll do though, what governments do, is to work out full plans, a bit like refer to, detail, whether it's details of royal commissions or other things. You work out a full plan, you then go out, you announce it, and you back it in. That's what we did over tax, whether it be the income tax changes that we made to stage 3. I went to the National Press Club. Go back and have a look at the way that the Herald and the Age reported that the next day.
What, objectively and clearly?
It was not glowing, let me tell you. And, there were political obituaries written for the government over the first period. But we knew what we were doing. We had our arguments. We'd gone through the detail in an orderly way. And similarly, the tax cuts that we put in place in last year's budget, it's not that long ago, last year's budget were important measures that will deliver, will increase the take-home pay of working people this July and next July. We'll work through a full comprehensive budget and we'll make announcements, and then I'm happy to come on the podcast and talk about it.
I've just got one more on the budget, more straightforward one. Ministers are talking about this budget as one where there's a real attempt to do some tightening on the spending side. How ambitious are you to get some spending cuts and saves in this budget? How lofty is your ceiling on what you can do there?
We have always looked for saves. We've put $114 billion of savings already, and that's on top of what we've done is to bank revenue upgrades, some 70% of it under the former government. Most of the revenue upgrades they just spent, and they had no saves in the last budget, not a dollar. So we had $20 billion of saves in the mid-year economic forecast just in December. So we'll go through. We've done that work. We'll continue to do do work. The ERC will step up its meetings over the next couple of months, and of course we'll look for savings that are appropriate. I think people want to ensure that every dollar of public spending is making a difference in terms of improving the lives of Australians, not just immediately, but also some of the measures are about the long-term change that is required, whether that be the health and hospitals agreement we've just done, or the better funding for every public school that's been talked about for a long time.
Is tightening up on spending a big focus of this budget?
It always is. That's what we do.
Prime Minister, as we record, the Liberal Party is preparing for a vote on their leadership with Angus Taylor contesting Susan Lee. I want to ask you, what do you think of Angus Taylor as a person? I know that the Labor side is very much trying to portray him as a blue blood, as a sort of Chino-wearing squattocracy type. But what's your experience of him behind closed doors or around the corridors of Parliament as an actual bloke?
I haven't had that much to do with him. That's the truth of the matter. I do think that he is one of those people on that side of politics who are, I guess, born to rule. That's the perception. And even the way that he's conducting this challenge is he's gone out there, he lost the ballot to Susan Lee. He's been on strike since in terms of doing anything as Shadow Minister for Defence, a pretty important portfolio. And last night he went out there and said he'd resigned, didn't even say he was challenging Susan Lee. It was extraordinary. And he's got no reason, no policy reason for direction. It was almost like he may as well have said, vote for me and I'll advance world peace. It was extraordinary, the lack of detail or any thought whatsoever.
Yeah, I think the spending budget is, I think everyone's waiting for May, that's for sure. Like it's getting up there. It's definitely getting up there.
Yeah, he, as Energy Minister, he was diabolical. And then as Shadow Treasurer, he opposed tax cuts, he opposed all of our cost of living relief. He went to an election arguing for higher taxes and higher deficits. It's diabolical. And the idea that what the Liberal Party need is to
the
become
nuclear stuff is going to be interesting.
Message that has been given to them at the last election and the one before.
Do you think there's been sexism in the way that the Liberals and the Nationals have treated the first female leader of the Liberal Party, from your vantage point?
I think certainly that it's fair to say Susan Lee hasn't been given a fair crack.
But do you think that's partly because of her gender, or anyway because of her gender?
I think that the coalition have failed to understand that if you want to represent the Australian people, half the Australian people, or just a bit over, are women. And on the range of issues, they're dismissive of policy issues, the women's health program that we've implemented, the shutting of the gender pay gap, the pay increases in feminised industries like aged care and childcare, the measures that we have put in place.
So this is where, I think Labor just trump, all the other parties, is they've already got all this sort of stuff. It's all written out. It's all talking points. They're just boom, boom, Medicare, aged care, gender gap, housing, they just have everything sorted, and they all just spit the same sort of thing, which, it just creates a more cohesive party, and it just kind of makes them look like they know what they're doing. Whereas at the moment, the coalition is just they're all fighting between. They're breaking up. They're changing leadership. The Nats and the Libs are head and head. It's just there's just lots of that, which I think is just basically what makes Labor just stick out a lot more.
Have all been dismissed by the coalition. I think that one of the pluses that the party I'm proud to lead have is we look like the population, where a majority of women in our caucus and around the cabinet table means that you get those voices and those issues. Yeah,
and that's good that the RBA sort of come out and say that, because that's what they're there for. I mean, at the end of the day, the thing about the Australian government and our political system and how we operate is that there should be this separation. There is that separation where everyone holds each other accountable. If you end up lying, if you continue down this path, you will get found out. And that's some of the things I always say, the good thing about Australia in terms of our judiciary, executive branch, legislative, and even when it comes down to RBA and banking and all that sort of stuff, is it's all separate. It is meant to be that way, because that way we don't a particular party or even a person, which people think Albo is a specific person, they just can't take the system for a ride, and that's a really, really good thing. I think that's one of the best things about Australia, is that there is that separation. No opposition to keep. 100%. That's why the coalition, there needs to be that other major party to basically keep them accountable 100%. And that's what's unfortunate about the current coalition, is that we're missing that. And if that other party ends up being One Nation, for example, it's just going to be chaos. It's just that's why I don't really support the whole One Nation thing.
And I think that the Liberal Party have failed to modernise, and I don't think Angus Taylor is at all in touch with the needs of Australians, or the aspirations that Australians have. I think that there are many people in the Liberal Party who have always never seen Labor as being a legitimate government, and that's why in their critique everything is always dialled up to 11. There's a complete failure to at least acknowledge that at the last election we received a considerable majority in the House of Representatives, and they continue to just oppose everything and not engage in any constructive way. And I think they're suffering as well from the fact that Peter Dutton did keep keep their team united. That was something that he saw as a big plus, but he did that by them shrinking in on themselves, becoming more conservative, more introspective, less with the capacity to engage on issues like climate change, like equity issues, like what is needed to advance Australia's national interest in the times where we are.
Quick answer. Is Andrew Hastie more dangerous to the Labor Party than Angus Taylor?
Andrew Hastie is more right-wing. I think that Australians are looking for a government that is reasonable, that listens to them, that's orderly, and that is prepared to engage constructively. My government is an orderly government. We had a comprehensive platform we took to the election. We're delivering that platform. Our opponents are good at identifying grievance and promoting division and trying to set Australian against Australian. But that's the One Nation agenda. And if you're going to be One Nation light, why wouldn't people just vote for the real thing?
PM, you've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate
I agree with that.
You've probably got some
That's what I sort of said at the start, is they can't go and try out Pauline Hanson. Like the Liberal Party, they need to have their own sort of values. They need to support their self. They can't go, if they're going to crack down on immigration, they can't go harder than Pauline Hanson, which I think maybe I get a bit of a feel that might be what Andrew Hastie would have done, but I'm not too sure on that. But hey, I've got to wrap it up here. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Appreciate it. Very, very engaging as always, which is really, really good. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday. What does Luke say here? What would happen if Labor needs one nation? Well, that's okay. I did a video a while ago and I said that the thing that One Nation should definitely be going for is just trying to have a bit more power, power in like that's what they have in the Senate, which is a good thing that they have. And you just have like trying to have that balance of power, like so that way Labor does need to go to One Nation for things, and that's how One Nation should have influence on things like immigration policy and that. But like that should be their. And Pauline Hanson has even said that in a couple of interviews once, which I was very, very surprised with, because she was like, what we should be doing is going for balance of power. That way they have a greater influence on policy. So that way, when the lower house works with the upper house, again, that separation, they have to go to One Nation and One Nation say, hey, make sure you write the bill like this, otherwise we won't support it and blah, blah, blah. Like that should be exactly how it goes through. And that's how One Nation have a better position. But if they kind of go, all right, now we're going to invest all this money and energy on trying to like contend for a major party, I think they will lose that position, I imagine. But